Hello, I'm Moni Vargas, the Creative and Program Director at Breakthrough, a nonprofit culture change organization that uses media, arts, and tech to promote human rights. Welcome to Breakthrough Spotlight, our weekly video and podcast series featuring conversations with community leaders, activists, artists, and partner organizations working to build a world that is more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable for all. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Breakthrough Spotlight. We're so happy you could join us. My name is Imani Richardson, and I'm a community engagement intern at Breakthrough, a nonprofit organization that uses arts, media, and tech for culture change. Today, I'm joining Agbebiyi, a writer, social worker, organizer with Survived and Punished New York, and co-creator of Aid to Abolition. I'm so excited to be talking with them. We want you to be a part of the conversation too, so please chime in on social media using the hashtag Breakthrough Spotlight and drop whatever questions you might have in the comments. We'll do our best to answer them. So, Kay, can you talk a bit about Aid to Abolition and how it came about?
Yeah, so Aid to Abolition is, I guess, a site or a tool that people can use. And it came to be after an organizer that I work with pretty closely in New York named Mon noticed that the 8 Can't Wait campaign was getting pretty popular on social media. And for those who don't know, 8 Can't Wait is like a set of 8 reformist ideas that are supposed to decrease instances of police brutality by 72% if they were implemented. But Mon and the rest of the Aid to Abolition team saw that these reforms and the attention that they were getting were pretty harmful for the abolitionist movement. So Mon recruited some people on Twitter, and we decided to make Aid to Abolition. And it started off as just like a Google Doc that people were working on, and then it kind of snowballed into a website, graphics, different translations, etc. So yeah, it's been really exciting.
Yes, I think we're currently in a really exciting moment, given that abolition is like a word on people's tongues. People are seemingly more receptive to it than ever, looking to learn about it. But I think it's also, really frustrating, given that people who are just familiarizing themselves with the work are okay or not okay with certain calls to action that are like explicitly not abolitionist. So can you talk a bit about abolition in the current moment and why understanding what it is and what it isn't is so important?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people think of reforms as something that we can use on a pathway to abolition, but most of the reforms that people are pointing to are reforms that expand the reach of the carceral state, and abolitionists do everything they can to, I guess, like shrink the reach. So the thing about reforms is it's not only that they that they're not abolitionists, but they're actually like harming and stopping abolitionist work that's happening right now. So I think people think that reforms might be neutral, but they're not. We're working against them just as we are anything else that expands the carceral state. And so I think it's really important that people actually understand what abolition is so that we don't get caught up in the cycle of pursuing these reforms that aren't actually doing anything to shrink the prison industrial complex and getting us back to square one. For example, body cameras. The movement lost a lot of momentum when people were kind of fixated on making sure that every police department had body cameras as a way to stop police violence. But all those calls really did was add more funding to police departments. And then a lot more police departments might have body cameras, but police officers are still turning them off, or they're still killing people on camera and the footage is suddenly mysteriously going missing. And so that's just an example of a reform that a lot of police departments implement in order to say, oh, we did what you want, without getting to the roots of how the total institution of policing itself is violence and not just these random instances of brutality. So yeah, reforms are not neutral, despite what many people have been led to believe, and they're actually working actively against abolition.
And can you talk a bit about how when we're talking about police abolition, that also ties into prison abolition and, targeting all areas of the prison industrial complex. Just because I feel like I've seen a lot of people who are, still in the process of learning about abolition and in support of it, but also calling, for the arrest of Breonna Taylor's murderers. So it's like, how do we, educate ourselves to see beyond just police violence and see where like state violence is affecting Black people in different ways?
Yeah, so when I call myself an abolitionist, it doesn't mean that I just want to get rid of police. It means that I want to get rid of the entire prison industrial complex, which is basically like as defined by critical resistance, the group that came up with the concept. It's a bunch of different things that are working together, or like an interlocking system that is set up so that people are profiting off of others being incarcerated. So when I'm saying that I am working towards abolition, it's not just police, it's prisons, it's pro-cop propaganda, it's school security officers, it's media that we consume, it's ICE, it's the military. And if we're going to truly stop the harm of policing, we're not going to be able to until we dismantle the entire system that upholds it. I think that it's really interesting because a lot of people who got involved with organizing after Ferguson, I know I was one of them, a couple years ago, we probably would have been like, yeah, like abolish policing and prisons are awful, but in the meantime, we need to prosecute these killer cops because we still do have prisons right now, and something needs to be done about them. But through engaging with more reading and writing about like, I guess, about the prison industrial complex, but also about like transformative justice, and just being able to understand that this entire system is anti-Black and it doesn't matter who's being incarcerated, and we need to get rid of it all, has really shifted my perspective to no longer ask for cops to be prosecuted for several reasons. The first is that it just gives the system legitimacy, and a lot of people think that prisons are a place where bad people go, and so you can't have it both ways. You can't say that you honor the dignity of every single person behind bars, but then also say that prison is where evil people end up. Another issue is just a lot of people spend time and resources on getting these cops prosecuted, only for it to not happen, and then for them to be sad, understandably about it, or for the movement to lose momentum. And then a third reason that I think that a lot of people aren't thinking about is that like prisons are a site for a lot of white supremacist violence. And so if these cops were incarcerated, it's not like they would go in and they wouldn't be making friendships with the COs, or they wouldn't be getting special treatment, or they wouldn't be able to have like access to like literal white supremacist groups that are taking place on the inside. So I don't wish these killer cops to be in jail with people's loved ones. And I don't see that as justice.
Yeah, I definitely think that's something I've been thinking about recently too, is why do we want cops in jail to then continue to do harm towards incarcerated people? It's like, if they're doing harm on the outside, simply being within the walls of a prison is not going to keep them from doing harm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at the heart of that conversation about abolition is accountability, and how like living in a carceral anti-Black society, accountability is often conflated with punishment, and trying to delineate the two, have accountability to ourselves, have accountability to the people that we're in community with. And so I guess my next question is, how did you develop your commitment to abolition? In terms of like, was there a point in your political education where it kind of just like, you were like, wow, this is what this really is? And then how is that value system reflected in your life, whether it's through your organizing, your career, or your interpersonal relationships?
Yeah, so I mean, I think accountability is a word that a lot of people are using lately, and in my opinion, a lot of people are misusing lately. So yeah, accountability and punishment are not the same thing. I came to abolition several years ago when I was just, I think I was on Twitter and I was like engaging with the work of Miriam Kaba and learning more about sexual violence that takes place in women's prisons. And this was around the time that I became a survivor of sexual violence. And I just was able to identify that moment or that experience as harm that I would not wish on anyone. And so once I realized that all over the country, people are being sexually violated in prisons in multiple ways. And we as a society we not only accept that, we encourage that, we make jokes about it. I realized there was no way that I could stop sexual violence without getting rid of prisons and also getting to the root of why sexual violence occurs in the first place. And so I think a misconception is that people are just kind of like, oh, I want to believe in abolition, it's set. Like, no, it was a hard process. There was so much that I had to unlearn, and there's so much that I've had to unlearn. And I'll continue to unlearn like for the rest of my life. So it wasn't like I just became an abolitionist and I didn't have any more confusing or icky feelings, or I didn't think about like people who have really harmed others. No, I had to grapple with all those confusing and difficult things. And that's kind of what led me onto the path that I'm on. And then as far as how accountability is like modeled in my like personal life, I mean, I think that it's important that the people that I'm interacting with or people that I have close relationships with are all abolitionists as well, and that they see the value of abolition, but then they also understand the importance of community and treating each other with care, even on a micro level. So it's modeled through my organizing in the sense that I organize with people who have similar ideas or similar views around accountability and around our responsibility to the people that we're organizing with on the outside, but also on the inside. And then also it's just, for me, it shows up as like a commitment to study. I've spent the last year, well, over a year now, going to as many workshops as I can about transformative justice or restorative justice or conflict mediation or sexual harm. I'm continuously like reading about it and learning more about it. So the work doesn't just stop when someone like declares himself an abolitionist. I think people need to realize that this is like a lifelong journey that we're all on, and then we're all trying to like figure out as we go.
And that the resources are there for. Black feminists have been theorizing about abolition for decades. Angela Davis, Miriam Kaba, Ruth Wilson Gilmore, and the work is there supporting it. And the work is also continuing, through and with us. And so can you talk a bit about what are some of the issues or aspects of abolition that you feel like are misconstrued or neglected in popular conversations about it as they're going on right now, but are really, really critical in thinking about an abolitionist future?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people think that abolitionists believe that when prisons are closed, that there won't be any more harm, that no one will unfortunately die or be assaulted, etc. And I think it's really important to reiterate that when we say that we want abolition, we're not saying that we want, or we're not guaranteeing that there's going to be a world without harm. We're just saying that we want a world where that harm is navigated in a way that respects the humanity of all who are involved and also gets to the root of why that harm happened in the first place. So I think a lot of people think that abolition is unrealistic because they assume that we're making a promise that there won't be any more violence or there won't be any more conflict. And we've never claimed that to be true. What we're saying is we want to come up with sustainable ways to work through that conflict. And then another thing is that a lot of people, I'm really happy that you brought up like Black feminists who've been doing this work for so long. A lot of people think because they haven't engaged with resources or literature or movies, etc., that someone hasn't already done that work. So I'm seeing a lot of people being like, well, no one's ever like handled like sexual violence within their community, or no one's ever like handled like murder, or like no one's ever like mediated conflict. And what they mean to say is I have not engaged with the work that other people have been doing for years. And I think that's a misconception as well.
I definitely agree. I see people like asking questions or coming, which is important, and coming to realizations for themselves that I think seem like very novel to them. And what always comes to mind for me, I'm like, a Black queer woman has said it and probably said it 50 years ago. The resources are available to you. I think definitely, I don't know if you saw on Twitter, but like the No Name J. Cole entire drama thing where it was like this Black woman who is like invested in like helping and guiding people through their own, political education, provide like pointing them towards the resources that they can use to inform themselves, but that's like still not enough. So realizing that like, people have put their entire lives and effort and care into like developing these theories and doing this work and providing these resources to us, and it's really the least that we can do to engage with them in a meaningful way. Can you speak about like what some of your favorites are?
Yeah, so anything by Angela Davis. I mean, I know a lot of people are like, okay, we get it, but it's because she's that good. like, what more is there to say? And then again, Ruth Wilson Gilmore, and then also Miriam Kaba. The work of Jackie Wang really transformed the way that I thought about prisons and also thought about capitalism. And then work that people are doing around like sexual violence and harm. So there's like the book Beyond Survival, which is really good. And then there's also The Revolution Starts at Home, which I've utilized or read different excerpts from. There's the book Invisible No More, or there's the writings of like Vicky Law or like Maya Shenwar. So those are the people that I would recommend. And then also just like podcasts, like the podcast Justice in America taught me a lot about like the privatization of prisons, and not just about like prison labor, but also just not being afraid to look at things that are outside of like academia. So a lot of good writing on responses to harm are actually like written by like anarchists who have been distributing a lot of free media about this content for decades through zines and things like that. And a lot of people have told me that they learned about abolition through like a Google Doc that I created. So not being afraid to like engage with things that are like outside of like a textbook or like outside of a library, I think is also really good.
Yeah, I think anyone who has a commitment to abolition, like a lot of the texts that you just mentioned are like integral to like forming that perspective. Angela Davis for me as well. Carceral Capitalism by Jackie Wang. Captive Genders is an anthology that I'm just coming across about trans embodiment in the prison industrial complex that I'm really excited to get into. I also know that you're one of the co-creators of the Disability Justice Mutual Aid Fund. Can you talk about some of your other work and projects and how abolition informs them?
Yeah, so the Disability Justice Mutual Aid Fund was a short-term fund that was used to fund people who were working around Black liberation protests, especially during like COVID. And we were able to raise $65,000 and distribute it to disabled activists or organizers across the country. And so abolition was integral to that work because abolition requires us to recognize the importance of mutual aid and giving to people and learning with each other. And so the project was really great for me because I was able to organize with people that I've been organizing with across the country on various things related to abolition, but we were all able to come together to work on that. So that's like one thing. And then through abolition, I joined Survived and Punished, and I'm also on the mutual aid team there. So we work to give $100 to our incarcerated organizers every single month. And then I also do mutual aid with another group, which came off of the No New Jails campaign called Inside Outside. And I think the reason that I gravitate towards mutual aid is because I think that because I have a larger online platform, it's relatively easy for me to raise a lot of money without putting like in that much effort. And I see it as my responsibility to do so. Because as an organizer who is on the outside, who's building off of work that our incarcerated organizers have been doing for years, I need to be finding ways to like leverage some of my like visibility to actually like help people who are helping others on the inside as well.
We've talked a bit about, harm and how to like grapple with questions of harm and how to, resolve and restore accountability and trust within a community. And I think one of the questions that come up for a lot of people when considering abolition, like you said, is like to go to like the most like gruesome parts of what it means to be in community with other people, which is harm. And I think specifically sexual violence is a question that comes up with people. And people have this like feeling that some people need to be in prison, like the worst of us need to be in prison. So what would you say to people who are struggling with that question of what happens with survivors of sexual violence, and then kind of tie that into your work with Survived and Punished and like what you guys do there?
Yeah, so I mean, a common response that I and other members of Survived and Punished have is, well, what happens to, like, people are like, when prisons close, like, what will happen to people who sexually abuse others? And I'm like, well, what happens now? Most of them are not in jail, and if they are, they're subject to more sexual violence or abuse. And when they get out, they're without community to help them move through like what they've done. So what we have right now is an awful system, and that's why we're going to continue seeing the same awful results. It's difficult for people, but we need to realize that the carceral state is not actually invested in stopping violence or actually invested in keeping us safe. What it's invested in is making a profit off of people who are criminalized. Once we rid ourselves of any expectation of the state keeping us safe, we'll be able to be more imaginative about our solutions for sexual violence or harm. But in the meantime, what is happening is survivors of sexual violence and abuse are being criminalized and are being sent to prison. So Survived and Punished is all about supporting and freeing those who have been criminalized and who have been arrested or incarcerated for defending themselves against various types of violence. We work with the families or the loved ones of people who are incarcerated to create survivor defense campaigns where we pressure politicians and also just pressure different like stakeholders in the community to free survivors. We also create a newsletter which we distribute inside and outside across the country, and we use that to fund various mutual aid projects. There's a mutual aid team or working group that I'm on right now that I told you about, and then there's also an anti-prosecutor working group, which is trying to dispel the myth that there is such thing as a progressive prosecutor. So they do a lot of political education around that. And they also pressure different prosecutors to free them all, which is, I guess, our like overall like strategy, or like our overall ask is freeing every survivor, but also freeing everyone in general. So the work that I do at Survive and Punish has been really helpful for my healing journey as well, because I'm organizing with other abolitionist survivors who understand just what is at stake. And that is really helpful for me as well.
That's amazing. That's just amazing work. Like, I wish people understood that when we're calling for everyone to be free, I'm calling for everyone to be free. That's the work that I'm invested in. Because we can't continue to be invested in institution and structures that harm us and are built to harm us and only do harm to us. And we shouldn't be okay with them doing harm. Another question that I have are, as you've, explored what accountability for yourself and within your community looks like, what are some things that communities are already doing, outside of the organizing work to, encourage to deal with harm, to deal with justice within the community?
Yeah, so outside of organizing work is hard because organizing takes up a lot of my time, but there are like like I said the other day, like I see like what an abolitionist like future looks like every time I interact with like my queer friends who are working to like navigate harm in a way that doesn't dispose of people, but also make sure that we're creating safety. Also, the disability justice community has actively been working on responses to the state, but also like building community outside of the state for decades, and they've been pretty much ignored, even though many people who are criminalized are disabled. So when I think of people who are like building community outside of the state, I see it every day. I see it within my friend group. I see it with the people who are working on things like pod mapping or like identifying who they're going to go to when instances of harm happen so that they're not relying on the police. People like my mom would never, well, until recently, she would never identify as an abolitionist, but she grew up in the country in Maryland, and she used to tell me stories about how there was like huge amounts of conflict between people that was resolved without anyone even thinking to call the police. So a lot of people think of abolition as like this thing that's like over there, but no, it's something that's practiced in communities every day. We just need to make sure that we're building upon it so that it's what's used every single time.
That's a beautiful word. Like, it is already happening, and it's about supporting the work that is already being done. Do you see an abolitionist politic developing and, you know, being supported and exercised in the younger generation in any particular ways, as they're like coming into contact with this work that, like we've already said, has existed for decades and has been developed?
Yeah, so Miriam Kaba and I organized together, and she does talk a lot about the value of young people. And she's always like, wow, young people are so creative. I love seeing what they come up with. And I was like, oh, okay, that's a feeling I'll have when I'm like 10 years older. But no, I'm having that feeling right now, and I'm only almost 26. So there's like a lot of young people who are working to, I guess, like disseminate information in really creative ways. And one of the ways that has been really helpful is through Aid to Abolition. A lot of young people have been collaborating with their families or like working by themselves to translate the information so that it's in various different languages. They've made artwork, they're making zines. Every time I log onto Instagram, there's someone who's like taken some work around abolition and made it their own. And so I think that, I guess Generation Z, if that's what they're called, I think that Generation Z is really, really, really creative, and they're really passionate about it. And when I was growing up, I did have some, well, no. When I was growing up, I don't think I had as many like younger organizers to like look up to, and like in the media to like point to. And that doesn't mean that they always get it 100% right, but just the fact that there are organizers out there who are pretty young who are doing this work, I don't think that when I was growing up there was anyone that I could really like point to where I'd be like, oh, this is someone in high school who's really, really like moving change. And I think that's really important as well. And then I also think that they're just creative with social media and different sites that most people older than them aren't really using, like TikTok. A lot of people on there are using that for political education as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Just I think being on social media, like, it is, at least in the circles that I'm connected to, it is very much young people who are doing the work, and very much in their own ways. I have a friend who, you know, like combines quotes from different abolitionist texts and then like lays them over different images, and uses that as a way to engage with people. Friends who, like you said, like make zines. I think it's just like very beautiful to like see and be in community with so many people who are committed to expanding abolition and just doing the work in whatever way that they can personally.
Mm-hmm.
And then my last question, just because I know for me at least, it's felt, like I said, very exciting, but also just a very like tiring time, a very exhausting time for organizers, and like conserving our energy levels making time for the things that make us happy. So what are some ways that you're maintaining excitement and joy right now?
I guess reading a lot, reading for leisure. I have a journal that I write in, and I try to write every single day, even if it's just a little bit. Simple things like just taking care of myself, like always making sure that I'm taking my meds or getting 8 hours of sleep or not skipping breakfast. Those are things that I won't compromise on, even if things are really busy or hectic. And then also with this wave of popularity in terms of abolition, I really had to actually learn how to reach out to people for help. So reaching out to my friend, being like, can you help me answer emails, or can you make this graphic, or things that I would usually just do by myself, I'm having to trust other people with. And it's also, this is my first wave of where a lot of things are happening at once, where I'm organizing with a disability. And so because of that, I have no choice but to ask for help if I want to get all the things that I'm planning to do done. And so this month or 2 month period has really been a learning experience for me. And I'm going to have to take these tools for self-care, tools for boundary setting with me into the future. So those are the main things that I do for self-care. And then also, just the people that I organize with are some of the best people I've ever met. And so hanging out with them in a way that's not structured about work, or writing postcards to them, or just talking to them, laughing with them. Even simple things we have been tracking the budget in New York, and we have a group chat where we just live text the budget hearings, and that sounds really stressful, but that's really enjoyable for us. So just simple things like that, where I'm interacting with my comrades, but we're not actually producing anything, has been really helpful for my mental health.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. We're all trying to find ways to show care and love and spend time with the people that we care about. And it makes all of the difference. I said that was my last question, but it's not my last question. But in terms of abolition within the prison industrial complex, can you also talk a bit about how that extends, how it must extend to the United States as a state, and can and should extend to different international contexts?
Yeah, so I mean, when I was talking earlier about being an abolitionist and working to dismantle all of the facets of the prison industrial complex, that includes the military. So I think that a lot of people in the U.S. See their struggles as not connected with other people across the world, but we have police departments in the U.S. that are training with soldiers in Israel, and working with the IDF. So different police departments across the world are collaborating on different ways to repress social movements and to keep people incarcerated. So there's no way that we're going to build a world without prisons, without stopping those collaborations, but also getting an analysis that is just a little bit broader than what's happening within our local neighborhoods. And that requires a lot of reading, and that also requires the hard work of building solidarity with people who are not exactly like us and who might not have all of the same views or life experiences as well.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us today. You can follow Kay on social media at SheaButterFemme. Stay tuned for the next episodes in Breakthrough Spotlight series. This program was made possible by donations from viewers like you. Every donation helps us create a more equitable and inclusive world for all.